So thanks for coming tonight. It's exciting that you are all here. I was thinking that we might have standing room only with this topic, but that's okay. We are broadcast as well, so hopefully people are at home watching. But I think there's some competing meetings as well. See, so but if you're trying to go to the hearings this evening,
Yes, meeting.
Yeah, so we will try to get you out. So I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and I'm leading the team of consultants. We are all jammed in at the end of this room because they kicked us out downstairs. So if you haven't been with us so far, we have our office set up downstairs and a big meeting space and all. And going to talk about sustainability now. I'm going to maybe go under some your neighbors.
Hi, Mike Delic, resident in town. My wife's a commissioner, but I live right off Waterfall Road. Got 3 kids in the schools here. Plan to be here for a while. Larry Barnett, live in Summerlin. Lived here about 3.5 years.
Bill in Nolensville, live in Britain Downs, been there 14 years. Kids are now no longer university.
The Waterfall, I live in Summerlin. I've been a Nolensville resident for 15 years, and I've got 4 kids.
Rob Burrell, I've been here for 14 years. I've been around the whole time. I have kids.
Jessica Salamita. I am from Sherwood Green Estates. I have 2 kids, high school and middle school. We moved here 3 years ago. I'm Darcy Yarbrough. I live in Bent Creek. I have a 7-year-old at Mill Creek and a 2-year-old who will be going there soon, in a couple years. I lived here for almost a year, but actually grew up here a long time ago. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Dennis. I'm director of the Mill Creek Watershed Association, and our mission is conservation and preservation of Mill Creek.
Jared Schaefer, Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative. I'm the project manager and planner.
Mike Lushak, I live in Bent Creek. Been here almost 4 years. Pretty involved in town politics, and I sit on the CIP committee.
I'm Courtney Adams. I'm a stay-at-home mom to 3 little kids who are 8, 6, and 4. 2 of them are at Mill Creek Elementary, and 1 is in the early intervention program at Jordan, who will be at Mill Creek.
And on the computer, Nick.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. My name is Nick Cohen. I'm a consultant with the Horsley Witten Group, and we're working with Nolensville through an EPA buildings block for regional resilience grant, focusing on Mill Creek, looking at flood risk, promoting healthy tributaries of Mill Creek, and looking at open space as well as enhancing community character. So certainly lots of overlap with this project, and I'm here to mostly listen in and weigh in where I can be useful. And nice to see you again, Kathleen, virtually.
Hi, hi, Nick.
All right. And you.
Suzanne Honeycutt. I am on the Town Events Advisory Committee, and I've been here 17 years, I think. I was here this morning.
I've been noting how many people have introduced themselves and said that they moved here 14, 15-ish years ago. What was going on then? Why?
I think it's when the economy tanked and things that were planned, everything went on hold. Right?
That's when the group started
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Like balance were moved around a little bit before this time. So
And if you were looking at the area at that time, Nolensville was kind of a bargain way to get into the area,
Yeah.
get into like some pretty good neighborhoods and stuff like that. So it was a really opportune time to buy a house.
Very interesting.
Only 1 subdivision. The Ballinger is about almost 20 years old.
Solar Stream had started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Britain Downs is about this.
Hello. How's it
Hello
going?
there.
You come just in time. We just finished introduction. So can you introduce yourself?
Melissa Hall.
All right. So if you haven't been to any of the other meetings yet, the format is pretty free form. It's really just a discussion. We're not from around here. We're from all the way over in Franklin. But we work all over the place, all over the country. So we're kind of used to extracting information from people. And so we hope we could just like lay it on us. I'll tell you what we've heard so far. We've heard, we love the creek, right? I've heard that a lot. I don't think anyone's objected to that. And we've all talked about and sort of seems to come to consensus that we need to feature it and make it something that's really noteworthy, that Nolensville can be more known for, rather than it be sort of tucked away and protected ecologically, but not emotionally. It's or physically, the physical form of it. We were back there today. I was walking around in it. I have an idea too, in the areas where you can't get greenway through because the property owner won't give you right of way. It's such a unique creek, and you just walk in the creek bed,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So,
it does get deep in, I mean, where you actually end up, above, it's above your head. But those places are not, but down here it tends to be pretty low. I
Yeah.
mean, I can show you the pockets where it gets
yeah,
deeper even down here, but, yeah, there's a lot of creek walking that goes on around here.
yeah. It's a great, because a lot of creeks you couldn't do that. It's like, oh shoot, we can't get access because of that fence or whatever. And if you wade through the creek or whatever. And very unique. Today was the first time I went out there, so I'm talking about it. So it's very unique, and I can see why everyone's enamored with it. And it looks much better in person than it does on Google Earth. It doesn't look like a dirt pile like it does on Google Earth. And I'm like, "Can I make that construction runoff?" Cool rocks. And we found a little waterfall area there, and what I thought was a sculpture
Where did you go?
just behind the mill.
Oh,
and
okay.
all
Yeah,
that.
okay,
Walk
the
down a
behind
little
the
bit
shore.
further to
I
the.
think that's like or something.
It was
There's
part of
part-
like a structure that the way it bent over when it got torn off, whatever, it
I've been
looked like.
trying
it
to
was on
get them
purpose.
to get that.
I think it's kind of neat. It's like public art. I think it's pretty good, right?
Have some better art.
Yeah.
Actually, it held up a water leak too.
Okay. See, count on me. All right. Well, so when I saw it, I thought, I can't believe they let them put art in here. They're so protective of it. I'm sure they thought it, so. Yeah, that's great.
Before our
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and a great bridge. That's pretty substantial. Really nice bridge there. But I saw, that it's not really featured, and also I'm curious about this. And by the way, I meant to say this at the beginning. The whole meeting doesn't have to be about the creek. I want to know other things about that you're interested with, like sustainability and other things. But let's start with the creek. How about that? When I was walking and taking my life in my hands, where right across from where the pork belly place is, right? It gets really narrow, and then that's where the waterfall is. I went through the woods there and I realized a few hours later I had stuff all in my hair, but it just shows I care. So I noticed that you can't see the creek, even though it's like 5 feet away from you. And so from a preservation, conservation, and all that perspective, is that intentional? Like
The problem is that it has to be, in general, there has to be 30-foot buffers, which there aren't there, I don't believe. And they actually would prefer that there be 60 buffers along both sides. A big part of the problem with the buffers that are there is that it's a lot of invasive species, Chinese privet, honeysuckle, different things like that. And so if that was pulled out and proper plants put in to stabilize the bank, you'd have some better views. And there's also the option of creating little inlets where you could actually go in, you get substantial buffer both parts of the creek,
right?
but maybe have an area where the creek is available for engaging for the community.
Not a one-size-fits-all buffer solution. So
Right.
yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I always see these little herds of goats you can rent, and they'll like go in and clear up the privets and things.
Yoga near us.
Actually saw the goat yoga place, so
But
I don't know
the
that
problem with the goats is that you have to get the roots out.
yeah,
You must, and then the erosion, you have to replace stuff quickly.
right.
It's very expensive, but it's something that, the right grant and the right elbow grease
Right.
to get it done.
Yeah, I don't think the goats can be trained to only target invasive species. I think they're a little bit more hungry than that. So, yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is Planet Palooza, we get to dream big, right?
Yeah, please.
So, like, my idea with the creek has always been, I grew up north, and we had a lot of, a lot of waterways that were like feeder little streams. And every time I went through like a downtown area, they wouldn't build right on it, but they would build parks along it, and there would always be benches that would at the points, or depending on the stream, you would build up banks and walking bridges from one side to the other. You can play in there, you can fish. So although the creek is nice, not being able to see it or use it or experience it is kind of, like you said, it's tucked away in the back, and it's almost like a nuisance at this point, because like we can't widen this bridge because there's crawdads in there that we have to be careful with. You can't build on this lot because the creek blows out. Well, if you want to have a sustainable natural feature like that, I believe that you should definitely clear all of it out, and then build up the banks and make sure that it stays inside the creek, the water stays inside the creek, and everybody gets to enjoy it. So you can see it when you're driving by, you can walk along it, you can play in it, instead of just leaving it alone and hoping it doesn't blow out this time it rains.
Do people go in the water?
Behind so there was like a buttercup festival in April. Our kids playing it. Yeah, that was the first time that like I went down to it, and
Right.
like there were a ton of people.
It's not
There
frowned
are certain
upon.
times of year that you can kayak all the way from here quite far.
Yeah.
I kayaked it from up to Blue Hole Road in Antioch
Oh, wow.
intersects there. And I know people who have kayaked the entire length of it. There's other, I just happened to get out there, but then there's other places where you can put in, there's several put-in spots all
Yeah.
along.
Yeah, as a stay-at-home mom, like I would really appreciate walkability to the creek and being able to utilize it with my children, because I do, in our backyards of Bent Creek, we do walk to the creek a lot, especially in the summer and play in the creek. But if we could walk to other areas of the creek where you were talking about where like the waterfall is, that would be amazing. I would love to utilize that area and just be able to appreciate the beauty, like with my family and other Nolensville residents.
You know, people like to go to the historic village area already. Charming, you know, and they like the creek, and it's sort of there they come together. And so I was talking in the last meeting about sort of bringing the two groups so that they are mutually supportive and all that. So I think there's some opportunities, and I noticed that behind the feed mill, they, what do you guys call that place?
Feed mill.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
so-
either way. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know what I mean. That they, they put some tables out there and some things, and they
Yeah.
kind of,
There's like a picnic
they're
area
doing
and-
something.
Yeah.
But it's like the seeds have been planted for something, right?
Mhm.
So if you think about like some of the back of house areas, behind the scenes areas in Leaper's Fork, it's like, whoa, you walk back there and it's like this magical wonderland of cool. They've creek. I wish they had a creek, but they got a pavilion and
Yeah.
places and all kinds of neat stuff. But I think right now in the village area, you have some sidewalks, but the overall experience of walking out there, what's the speed limit there right now? It's in 30,
30.
right? I wish I had a radar gun.
Oh,
Right? No, it's not 30, but we conducted an accidental experiment. I was actually measuring the lanes out there. We can do it with your phone, so I'm coming across and I went too far, and it's like, oh shoot, I need to go back. All these cars started coming, and so I was standing really close to the lane, and I had my back or side to it, so it didn't look like I was about to cross. But just me being there, they slowed down like 10 miles an hour. It was amazing, right? And so there's some things that you can do without much effort in that area with the way the road's set up, the sign of the road. And like we were comparing that section of the road to the little charming road that runs through Leaper's Fork, and what are the differences? And one of the differences is in Leaper's Fork, you have the paved 2 lanes that go through, and then there's about 2 feet of additional pavement beyond the line, and then it goes to this gravel country gravel lot, whatever. And you guys have like 10 feet of paved shoulder, and then you have where people park is paved as well. And so it's like 60 feet across of paving. And as the driver, you just totally feel comfortable, like going way faster than you should. And then as a pedestrian, like, I don't know how, if you guys go down there, if that's just for tourists, but you know, I imagine like the one thing, if you're looking at the feed mill to the left, looks like a train depot or something. And it's really close. And I'm like, you know, come out of that as a shop or something, sort of feel like you have to shimmy along like a secret agent, you know, or something, just because the experience out there is just not welcoming, you know, and the businesses are like staying in business in spite of the experience, right? And so there's a few things you can do to fix that, and then take that one step further and you start looking at the back, the creek is and all, and it's just like a magical moment, you know. And then how do you extend that beyond just the village, right? Because people talk about Greenway all along and all of these things. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but sorry, I'm talking so much, but it's just like, I've had a lot of thoughts today been out there. So we went out there, and there's that little parking lot too. It's next to the feed mill. And there's this green patch in the middle of it, and it's kind of like a parkish sort of thing. And I thought, wouldn't that have been an opportunity for stormwater, right? You know, like if you just sort of and put water loving plants in there, and you made a sustainable stormwater feature. And so it's like these little things, these moments between the buildings and all kinds of.
If I can just interject,
please.
that parking lot to me was like, I was so
'Cause it's by the
thankful
bridge,
because
right?
they were, that was getting closer. You're right. It could be a better island that is absorbing stormwater, but that's a start. And they also, the plants in there are a lot more native than are usually used. If people, so if you want to, you know, go in and clean up the creek and create these little vignettes for sitting or, you know, lunching or whatever, bring in things to stabilize the bank that are the native grasses that are with this long, you know, root system to really help stabilize that soil and maintain the bank there. And then you have little openings for people to go down onto the rocks and things like that, and use that same sort of naturalized area like they did in that parking lot. That would help a lot. But also, like you said, in even more of the stormwater control.
Talking about the parking lot, I had another point to make. Being a stay-at-home mom, like my dream come true would be to not drive anywhere, to be able to walk everywhere in Nolensville. And speaking of that area by the feed mill, there is no safe way for me and my kids to get there. Both of my boys are finally efficient riding bikes. And they ask me all the time, like, Mom, can I ride my bike to Sonic? Mom, can I go to the feed mill? And I can't, like, even with their dad, I don't feel safe and with them riding there. And actually for Christmas, I'm getting a bicycle with an electric assist. And I'm like, where do I have to ride in Nolensville? I'd love to ride to the creek and spend the day with my kids there, but I just don't feel safe, like without the bike lanes. And just talking about the parking lot made me think of that. I'm like, it's so close, but it's sad to have to drive there and not have the connectivity.
And I agree with that. I mean, it does not take long to walk, like from Bent Creek, it does not take long to walk to that part of town. And I really like that. I walked down to Buttercup Festival when we went, and that was nice, but it was also sketch. And so
It was dangerous.
you're feeling kind of like, oh, they see me. And especially like, you know, 6-year-old or 7-year-old knows to stay like with me, but 2-year-old needs to be on a leash because she will like water bug out. It's just hard to wander around. So it would be nice to have like walkable like trails to that part of town, to the creek, bike lanes. Talking about the plants to stabilize, I was thinking like, you know, we have like 2 to 3 nurseries, I think, in town. Like, could we work with them?
We
provide
could.
that kind
I've
of, like,
talked with them. They don't have as many native species at those 2 nurseries as the 2 individuals that are on our stakeholder list that we developed for the EPA initiative. And I've brought a couple copies to leave. Gretchen brought them to leave with people. So there's they can weigh in with very interesting ideas on landscape. We have a landscape architect who is volunteered as a stakeholder, and a certified horticulturalist from Bates Nursery, which they have two different Bates nurseries. I think one's over in Franklin and one's north of here. But they have great ideas for landscaping. And when when we're talking about sustainability, sustaining the creek and health of the waterway is not the only thing you do when you take care of your natural resource. You also are sustaining your economy, because the more you build a beautiful environment and an environment with good character, so the home complement the landscaping that you have, the natural resources that you have, the more you do that, the more people want to come to your community, and the sustainability becomes economic sustainability. So taking care of and preserving and protecting your natural resources actually is very advantageous to creating a community that's going to be sustainable for people and the habitats that we're trying to protect as well.
Well, respectfully, I don't think we really have a problem with having a desire to move here.
Yeah.
It's like a great desire when people want to move here. Our economy is fairly good. We just need more places to shop and work, things like that.
How do y'all do with visitors though? You have lots of people want to move here. Do you have many visitors?
I don't know.
Visitors in the sense of visiting me at my home or visiting the town?
No,
for the
like
day?
let's go to Nolensville for the day
I
on
mean, I don't
Saturday.
really hear about people who are like, let's go to Nolensville for the day. Like, I have a friend that lives down in Columbia who was like, what should I see? And I was like, there are so many places to see.
Yeah.
And she was pleasantly surprised. Like,
Go check out Knowles Road at like 8 o'clock tomorrow night on a Friday.
It's hot.
What are they doing?
Very cool springs.
We're going other directions.
Okay. Oh, I thought you meant there's gonna be a lot of people there.
Oh,
No,
it's there's a football game or something.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
grandparents visit, we have so many posts like on our Nolensville 411, like I have family in town, where should we go? And it's always recommendations outside of Nolensville, like, go to Arrington Vineyards,
Yeah.
or go to downtown Nashville. There's nothing for them to really do or stay in Nolensville.
Also, a lot of people who pass through Nolensville on the way to and from work, that there's an audience you can capture that they don't just keep on trucking.
Right.
I typically recommend like places to eat.
You have some good places. We went to Pork Belly Farmhouse
Yeah,
last night, and that was.
absolutely.
And if you ever ordered the pork belly, they're not joking around. It's like the
Yeah.
whole belly. I mean, I thought, man, like,
Well, and I think we have like quite a few things that are great, but I also think they need a lot more like healthier options.
yeah, it was not healthy.
So, at least the salad.
Yeah.
I think you could do well with, and I think maybe Oh My Child might be trying to do a little bit of it, but in Michigan, I saw a place called Farm Stop. It's to support local farmers. Our farmers market is tremendous, it's wonderful, but it's only 4 hours on a Saturday.
Yeah.
But what this store does, and they build it sustainably, is it allows the businesses, the startup businesses and farmers to leave their goods there during the week.
Mm.
So it's kind of like renting a, I know we have antiques,
Like a booth.
Mhm.
but they're doing it for their startup businesses, and they have a deli there that takes, the food that the startup businesses are trying to get started with, and they have somebody run the store during the week. The farmers get a ton more money for their products because they get almost nothing when they mass produce.
Yeah. Where is
Or
that?
mass-
Farm stock?
It's called Farm Stop. I actually uploaded it on our Planpalooza site. I
Okay.
uploaded some pictures of
Oh,
it.
perfect. All right. I'll
There's
go check it out.
it's there. But I mean, it just, they can rent the booth, and I think the rental is like a percentage of. I know this place has been so successful, it brings like several $1 million to town. And they are teaching other communities throughout the Michigan area on how to build those. So they do classes. And
I love
and
that
how to do
versus a
that.
big box store, just
Oh,
such like a unique business and supporting locally owned people. I
And
like
it
that idea a
sustains
lot
all
more.
the local people who use the farmers market are sustained, their economies is sustained in that kind of environment. So.
Mhm.
And just talking, I know this is Planapalooza, just talking about visitors and sustainability and like houses to reflect the environment. a point that I wanted to make was, you know, all of my family lives out of town and my parents do come to visit. And I would love my family to live here. I'd love my parents and my in-laws to live here, but they're older and they need a ranch style home with a small yard that's not a lot to maintain. And then that also makes me think of the future of my children. When my children are older and out of the house and graduate, they're not going to be able to afford a $600,000 home in one of these large, sprawling neighborhoods. And we're building a town that's so charming that we all love and we all love to be in. Of course, we want our children to move back and live with their families. So I just would love housing that is available for older people and
Yeah.
for our children someday.
So maybe a little bit of a counterpoint too, though, is, as I said, I moved here 3.5 years ago. And when you're talking about development and building this and doing that, I love the fact that there's cows on the corner of Clovercroft and Nolensville Road. If they stayed there for the next 100 years, I personally would be happy. Okay. If there was not a Kroger being built right outside the Summerlin subdivision, I'd be happy to have the cows over there. So as you talk about adding this and adding this and adding this, and I do realize we need tax revenue, so things have to happen. But the more you build, the more it becomes like a city instead of a town. And I like the town. I came here knowing that I was going to have to drive a half an hour to Costco, a half an hour to Culver's. Those were my 2 requirements to move here. But I was within a half an hour of Costco and Culver's. But that's me, so that tells you a lot. But I love the charming small town. And while I appreciate the trails that are already there, which is good, and maybe doing more trails and stuff, but the through roads and all that kind of stuff is like, I know I've got to go 30 minutes to get to some restaurants and things like that. And when I moved here, I was willing to do that because this is the kind of environment I want to live in.
There's a few things that go along with
I'm
that.
sorry. Can I
So,
just ask you,
yeah.
what do you think is sustainability then? I'm just, because to me, that's a big question. Like, what is sustainability?
I can kind of piggyback off of that. When Rob said that there's a ghost town at 8 o'clock on Friday, the reason for that is because we have buildings that sell things. We don't have places to provide experiences. So like on Friday night, if I'm taking my wife out for dinner and I'm getting a babysitter, like me personally, I'm going to Franklin, I'm going to 55 South, walking down to Kilwins to get ice cream, and then going to the pharmacy for some drinks, and then getting back in my car and coming back home. Like, I'm not going to take her to Brothers for a $10 burger and then have a beer there and then get in my car and then drive out of a strip mall and go home. That's not an experience. It's just, I love Brothers. I can eat there every day, but they are a place in a building that sells things. They don't provide an experience. And I think that if you want to have a sustainable economy and if you want to have a sustainable town, you have to retain money being leaked out of your economy, right? And the way to do that is you provide places that give you an experience instead of buildings that sell you.
Well, and it's interesting, the whole thing with the cows. So you said you would be happy if that stayed for 100 years, and what?
Probably more realistically 20 years.
I think a lot of us agree that you still want that small town feel.
Right.
But the
That
only way to
is
keep the
Nolensville,
cows,
right? And so
The only way
maybe
to
not the cows, but
the only way to keep the cows is to buy the farmland,
yeah.
right?
Right.
But I think
So sustainable farmland and sustainable
I
charm.
think
is
it's like
right? That's kind of what you're getting at? I was just trying to get that. I think that's.
My favorite cows were the corner kids.
I just think it's inevitable that like people are gonna
That's
move
where I
here.
felt
Like, more and
happy
more
when I
people are
drove
gonna
by.
move here, and like
Yeah, but
we have an
part-
opportunity to make.
I know,
this-
y'all kicked them out.
I know, and now I can't see the creek
That was
there.
like
That was
what they were
my
saying, y'all
favorite
kicked them
spot
out.
the whole
See,
town.
so the problem is cows in the water create
Yeah.
E. coli in the water, which
No.
now we have dogs pretty
Yeah.
well. So, yeah, T-Deck wasn't, and I was.
And then
I
they did a
wasn't
terrible,
involved.
they hid the whole thing after that, so.
Well,
Because you used to be
everywhere.
able to see the water as you drove down.
Yeah, they used to mow
Road.
because that was their private property and they, you know, they mowed it because it was their private property.
All right, so
But-
pause there one
Actually,
second.
So,
Kid
yeah.
Road,
Hold on, one
actually
second.
Kid Road where the cows used to go in the creek.
Yeah.
That was Herbert Nichols' farm.
Right,
When Catalina bought, they bought all that field.
Mhm.
It's floodplain,
right.
so they couldn't build it. So the floodplain was allowed to go back to its natural state.
That's how
And
you
that's
preserve.
why it's grown up since that's happened. Catalina's 10, 12 years old. I probably wasn't here when that happened. That's how much it's grown up.
All right, so
Herbert used to keep those fields mowed. That's where his cows pasture.
I know.
So a good point was just made that we need to come back to.
Right.
Can you say what you just said a second ago?
So people are gonna inevitably move. Like that's happening. I was born and raised here. I moved out of here to out west in like 2003, but I grew up like just off of Holt Road. So it's like my parents' house is like 15 minutes from here. And Nolensville back then was the sticks. And like I remember telling people, because I went to Brentwood High, like, where do you live? And we weren't even really part of Brentwood, and we were annexed by them eventually. We were just deemed Lincoln County. And so I would tell people, oh, I live near Nolensville. And they're like, oh, you live out in the boonies. And so to have come back and see how much it has grown since then, to see how much Franklin has grown. My mom used to work on Main Street in Franklin, and it used to be like Stitcher's Garden and like, you know, knitting stores. And like now it's like, it's awesome. I think it's great, but I think probably some people would say they don't like it. But it's inevitable, like change is inevitable. But we do get to like have the opportunity to direct that change. And this is what this is. And what does that look like? You want to maintain the small town charm. You want to not have just a bunch of chain stores. I would love to, support local. That's why I say, like, can we work with the nurseries to provide the plants? Can we work with like Smuckers up the street to provide like seating for these pavilions and things that we were thinking would be nice? Like, you help sustain the businesses are here, and maybe other people have business ideas that they would love to open up, and they are here. And it would be another Nolensville place that we get to support. So
I did an informal survey at one of the meetings before, and I said, who's lived here 5 years, who's lived here 10 years, or raise their hand. And then somebody said they had been here 60 years, I think.
Yeah.
And I said, well, all of you have to turn to him and say, thanks for letting you come.
Mhm.
Right? Because
Absolutely.
this is the thing, I see this every city we work in around the country. People say, I moved here because I like it this certain way. I didn't move here to see it change.
Mhm.
And I kind of always chuckle when I hear people say that, because when you moved here, you changed it.
Yeah.
Right? You're one more person, you're one more car. There was one more house that was needed to house you, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't think of it that way. It's just normal. Like we think of, we like it. But it also doesn't have to be one thing or the other, right? Shouldn't be a one size fits all for any town or city or any place.
Mhm.
You can have cows, and you can have we talked a lot about West Haven over in Franklin, right? And you look across the street and it's Gentry's farm, and there's the cows that are there, and you can hear them moving in the night. There's 2,000 houses across the street from them, and people come from elsewhere, and people in the neighborhood go to the neighborhood center rather than downtown Franklin a lot, right? For they're walking, and so it has, even though it's relatively dense and very dense compared to here, it is much more sustainable than the way that you've developed all up until the moment that I arrived here, so.
Revenue wise, you right now, West Haven here is like just down.
I don't-
per acre.
I don't know. It's price wise, it's very comparable on a price per square foot. Downtown Franklin is still more per square foot. But as far as how much tax revenue and things it's generating, I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is, because we worked on the zoning in Franklin recently, and one of the things that they were having us do is figure out how to solve the fact that the whole Cool Springs area is aging and becoming old. Who wants office park, all that stuff? Nobody had experience. There's no experiences there.
That's unpersonal.
And so exactly. And so the the idea was they cared about it so much because it was an economic engine, but they also care about downtown Franklin because it's equivalently an economic engine. And you look how small the 2.5 blocks or so of Main Street or 16 blocks of all the historic downtown are compared to how big Cool Springs is and how inefficient it is. These giant seas of parking, all this impervious surfaces, and who knows how many streams are in pipes underneath all that now, you know? And so with the springs, I was like, yeah, where'd the springs go? I never seen them. So, so yeah, there's some interesting things that don't seem intuitive when you're talking about sustainability and development and all. But like I said, that's only one thing or the other. There's room for everyone's voices. It's kind of great.
So I've been to the kickoff event a couple months ago, and then I was there last night, and I made an effort not to say anything after your presentations because I think that you're so spot on with everything that you say that I don't want to like accidentally trigger like a wrong word and just derails the whole process. But the one I listened today, and one of the cool things that I heard was talking about the widths of streets, and that kind of comes back to sustainability because if you make them more narrow, not only are they safer, people travel on them with like lesser speeds, but you also there's less to maintain and replace. Like instead of having 30 feet width, you have 20 feet, and people drive slower. There's less, I'm presuming less accidents, so less damage to them, and they get used a lot more or in a lot more efficient ways, and they cost a lot less. So like stuff like just little things like that, when you bake them into your zoning, they do over time make a big difference. And the more productive and the smaller the area is, then you do get to preserve cows further out because you don't need that land to make up the shortfalls of the sprawl that you have going on.
Exactly. Because there's only a certain number of people who do want to move here, by the way, at any given time, right? This thing is called the absorption rate, right? How fast people want to come. And so you think, well, if you make more, if you make smaller lots, and that's just going to be more people. Well, that's not true, right? It's not like, all of a sudden all this other farmland wasn't also available and could have been developed. And so what we're doing is by developing a little bit more compactly than you have been, you now can start saving not just Nolensville farmland and nature, but the entire county and all on and on and on. And so if you took not to keep using West Haven as an example, but it's close by and they know it. If you took those same number of houses and put them on half-acre, quarter-acre lots, 1-acre lots, and spread them across Williamson County, we're kind of done. There's no more cows. There's no more farms. There's none of that. There's no streams, and so it's kind of an interesting thing. Like I don't know. So it's neat to think about a different position. Yeah.
Well, and going back to preferences too, not all preferences are created equally, and everybody has their own preferences, and depending on what preferences you pick, they will have a cost behind them. And it's not just a cost for the person who picks those preferences, it's a cost for everybody in the town. Everyone has to pay for them. So I would like to see the least invasive preferences if possible.
Right. That have the least impact on others.
Correct.
Like you're okay impacting yourself, you just don't want everybody else impacted.
Sure, and I would like to hope that everyone would approach that from a neighborhood perspective. Think of it that way.
No, I think that's a great way to think about it. As we talk about things like connectivity, for instance, right? And tying it to sustainability, since it's the meeting of sustainability, but the more time y'all are sitting in traffic on Nolensville Road, with this sort of self-induced wound that you cause yourself each day because of the development pattern that you have, but the roads don't connect to it. And so it's like, obviously I'm sure y'all aren't just turning your cars off while you're sitting out there, right? So, it becomes kind of a parking lot. One thing I did notice was you have a small patch of pervious pavement out back in the parking lot. I don't know if y'all know that or not. I was excited to see that. Is that like a demonstration project? Is that like
Some of all these.
Oh, you have some more? Okay.
Well, ours.
So it's not-
It's Brentwood, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
theirs.
Got
Yeah,
it, got
it'd
it.
be nice to see other places, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I can speak to that a little bit because of my interaction with Metro Water services. And so Metro Stormwater has been encouraging the builders locally, mostly in Davidson County. I don't think Williamson County is quite up to the same speed as Metro, but they were asking the builders and the developers to try some of these different kinds of impervious materials, rain gardens and things like that, and biofiltration devices, up until a point, and then about a year or two ago, they pulled the trigger and said, now you must use them. So now you're starting to see, like if you go to the Aldi's, that bioinfiltration, one of the ponds there, that's right off the parking lot, there's pervious material in the parking lot, and then the bioinfiltration system is set up so there's a lot of good gravel and infiltration devices underneath it. Then there's trees, there's wildflowers, and there's grasses in those ponds. You do not see that here in the Nolensville area. You don't see it mostly in Williamsville.
We're getting that here.
I'm hoping
These last developments have that now.
but the bioretention ponds are not as efficient as using bioinfiltration.
Well, and it's a multitude of techniques really that all kind of work together. And so that's why I was pointing out that little parking lot with that little green patch, and it seems so insignificant. And so does a little patch of pervious pavement back there, but you do a little of this, a little of that here, and they're all kind of in the system, in the chain, then all of a sudden now it's a huge impact, and you don't have to have these sort of ponds around or that kind of catch all the garbage, and you have to put a fence around, and so you see them out of parking lots. So I think there's some opportunities for that, and it also can add some more interest and more charm and make you a little bit more vegetated, overall, and so have that softer kind of image of this place. So I'm excited to kind of look at that with all of you and see if there's some ways that we can add to that, but not just say, we hope you will, maybe please, kind of, no, here are the standards, it's like we have an important body of water right here, we need to protect it. You're lucky to be able to develop in Nolensville, because a lot of people want to, and if we're gonna be here, then so be it. And it just so happens that sustainable stormwater techniques are often a lot less expensive than doing conventional underground pipes and all that. Like if you look back at Leaper's Fork is a much more charming experience than driving through your little historic village. No shade there, but that's just the case, right? But it's also much more sustainable because you have only, as I described, just that little bit of paving, and then it immediately goes to this pervious to gravel, and the water can go through there, and you don't, it's cheaper, it doesn't cost as much as asphalt, on and on and on. And so it's kind of neat because a lot of times things like this cost extra or have some negative visual impact. And look, a good example of solar, right? So solar panels designed by engineers, they look like they're designed by engineers most of the time, except for a Tesla roof, if you've seen that, just cool. But nonetheless, they're pretty ugly, and they are, cost extra money, right? But they're sustainable, so that's great. And so with stormwater, we can actually, say, hey, do this, and it's not going to cost you a fortune. You just have to think about it a little bit more in advance. So, that's cool. All right, what else?
I have a question, and this may have been brought up before because we were in another meeting, so my apologies, but thinking about sustainability and building something that is an experience and a place, and thinking about the creek and what could be done, has anyone recommended or put out the idea that, as we look to enhance the village experience, that maybe we have a few restaurants and whatnot that have backseating patio that overlooks the creek, and coastal cities build where the water can flow even underneath. Right? And you can do that. There's a way to do it. I just think that it would be a fantastic attraction, to have a few restaurants like that where you could have a date night, to your point earlier, and you're sitting there overlooking the creek and, having a glass of wine, or you're having a girls' night out, or whatever it is. I don't know if that's been brought up in any of the sessions, but I hope we can get something like that added to the list of things that, we'd like to see. Because I think and I don't know what that looks like in terms of the zoning, to be honest with you, but I just want to make sure that as we're thinking about that sustainability, how do we create the space that so many of us would like to have, around the creek like that, you can go and enjoy it in many different ways, not just sitting on a bench next to the creek.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm wondering what's causing people to not do it already.
Yeah, I don't know.
Why don't they?
It has to do a lot with the need for repairing buffers. But as I mentioned earlier, we talked about this briefly, Lisa, is that there is some wiggle room to create these vignettes, these places, and as long as you bring the sustainable buffer in other regions, and then those areas where you're bringing in that sort of experience, if they use really strong structural grasses and trees and things that will stabilize the bank and stabilize the area around the stream and help create that ambiance, but also protect the creek. I think you could get it through, but TDEC would be in there wanting to make sure, well, buffer zones and this and that. But if you pitched it that way with this idea that you're really taking a good look at the sustainability of this area and what you're putting in there, you might be able to get it.
Well, I was thinking like Martin's, Tzatziki's, and Outlander. I mean, there's your opportunity to create a beautiful scenery.
They're
between
too far.
that
The
and
issue though
the-
too is the town has made it almost fearful to come near the creek because you can't go anywhere near the floodplain. You build something on a flood line, like just outside the floodplain, everybody's screaming that the next flood's gonna be bigger than 2010. So there is this fear of like we have to stay out as far away from that creek as possible. So then when you do have restaurants that are opening up like Martin's that's directly up to it, they're like, I'm just not gonna mess with it. Now it's another meeting and another education of the board or boards or whatever. I'll just run a trail like zoning tells me to, and I'll just leave it alone. But I do think it would be extremely beneficial to zone in if you're building on a lot that has a floodplain, you do improve that area somehow, or you just turn it over to the town, and once the town has enough of it, then the town can go in and clear out the brush and improve the banks and do a trail and park benches and all that stuff. And then once you do have that space there, then I guarantee you that if we allowed or we promoted that idea or we just went and did it, I guarantee you that Martin's would build up a balcony to face that area automatically with lights and benches and everything back there. They just stay out of it because we as a town as a whole have made it very fearful for anybody to go into anywhere near the flood line. So
Well, I think that goes back to a conversation earlier today, though, if we can get more standards that are easy for a builder, a business owner, whoever to read that are related to here's how you build in the floodplain.
Yeah.
Because there are components of the floodplain that there are certain things you can build, right, in a floodplain. You could put a park there. You can, there's lots of different things like that you can do. And so if we can really clarify those standards, I think that would help us to be able to overcome what you're talking about, Mike, because I do think there's fear around that, for sure.
And there's really good reason for that, because the building in the floodplain the proof is in the pudding. All you have to do is look to 7 Mile Creek, which is a tributary of Neal. All of those homes that are now condemned and being purchased by FEMA and all those people are having to be relocated. And with the increase in the storms that we're having in this area, we really have to be very, very judicious about building in the floodplain. It is a problem. And there's other areas that can be developed. And this idea of this compact development, these nice little sort of village areas, you can make those just as beautiful and extend your parkland and your walkways out into the areas that are in the floodplain. And it is a problem, and that's a big part. And this is the floodwater, the headwater areas, which makes it even more of a problem because all of the little streams that are coming together here at the headwaters are also problematic because they also have a flood.
So if it is such a big problem, shouldn't we as a town promote enhancing it and fixing the problem instead of staying as far away from it as possible?
Well,
I mean, it's always going to flood, so we might as well
Figure it out.
have incentives to build the beds up higher so that people don't flood like they've been flooding for probably 200 years in the area.
Build it
right?
on stilts?
No, but bringing in dirt and building up a trail just a little bit higher.
I will
Why
add
can't we
that
do that?
architects can help to your point, as well as, I think anybody who goes to any coastal city knows that you can build close to the water and be okay if you do it correctly, right? But I don't think we've done a lot of it because we haven't needed to, first of all. And as we're growing, it's a great opportunity for us to enhance that area and make it an attraction, is all I'm saying.
The only
It
other
may
problem
be
we have,
Greenway,
yeah, it's
but,
true, yeah.
you know, I think
And-
there's a way to do that where,
The other problem we have in this area, when you're building in floodplains, that you don't necessarily have on in a coastal area, is you're on karst. And karst is essentially like Swiss cheese. It's wholly, lots of sinkholes, lots of holes, and then there's a very high water table. So when you go to build in the floodplain here, you have to have really strong hydrology, because you have to know when you're putting in this pervious materials, what you're shifting somewhere else.
yeah.
Sure,
But
but the idea that
let's
we,
be clear, I mean, the creek doesn't flood out both sides.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
Everywhere.
Correct.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Let me correct you
Everywhere.
on the creek just a little bit.
But it
I've been here
does.
since '79, first big flood. That's the one that 7 Mile Creek got so big on. Mill Creek will, on the high water, will come up behind Martin's and go all the way across and get into the first two houses at Sunset.
But it doesn't come
Correct,
up where
but it
Britton
doesn't,
Downs is.
but it is going
Up
the other
Britton
side.
Downs, the entrance to Britton Downs,
The entrance gets flooded, but
Is it
not
flooded?
Britton Downs.
Entrance because it's a
but
depression,
it,
but
but is
there,
that
there
way?
are areas around.
Excuse me, let me finish.
Well, no, you interrupted me first.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So what I said was that we're acting like the creek all up and down floods everywhere. And it's just not true.
But it's all
Britton
mapped. right?
Downs.
We got
The
all the
creek
maps.
is there.
out.
That's right.
We have it
So
all
it's all the
mapped.
way up to Nolensville.
I mean, here's
We
the thing
say
to
that we're
consider
here
too,
to help.
is humankind has built on freshwater areas since we were in mud huts.
Yeah.
And we figured out ways to live near freshwater sources. That's the only reason why we can't do that here.
Can you educate me? Is the feed mill built on a floodplain? Is that a floodplain area? Okay. So those
No, I
stores
don't
and
know.
those
Did they-
antique
I
stores
don't
are all in a
think
floodplain?
They didn't get water in there.
Okay.
The places
same
that
kind of
flooded-
material around it is what you're describing with the holes and everything, but the feed mill's more built on a rock base, isn't it?
I think so.
Is that why the building is elevated?
You know,
Because they
I don't
just
know
seem to
how they built
successfully
it.
run, and
It's
I've
been
never seen
there
them
for so
flood. I'm
long.
just
I don't
So
know.
what about
Wait.
that church then? Did that get like flooded?
That got flooded.
So at a minimum though, what you could do if you're trying to feature it, let's say Martin's stayed where it was, but Martin wanted to have this cool outdoor dining experience. It's like this deck that's built or whatever, and it's literally got a few
Right.
small points that are touching it. And you could even go sit out there in a flood and check it out, right? And eat your brisket or whatever, you know? And so there, you know, again, back to what I said earlier, it's not a yes or a no or this or that. I think it's the degree to which we do. And when we were working in Peoria, Illinois one time, and it floods all the time, right? All the buildings along the river. And so what they've done is they, you know, if you have a shop there, you just make sure your merchandise is, you know, elevated up, and the floor is concrete. You don't use hardwood and stuff. So
Yeah.
look at Venice, you know, for
I was about to
example.
say,
So
like,
there's
if
all
they can
kinds
make
of
it work.
there's all kinds of places that do it, but it's a whole nother, you know, it's like a whole nother level of care. And I think probably what you've seen around here is careless development when people have headed towards the water. And so it's hard to have any confidence that anyone's going to do, if you allow it, going to do anything. So then you just say no, because somebody will goof it up and do something dumb. And also, even if we are doing something lightweight, like an outdoor dining deck or something, then you know, assuming that you're close enough and there actually is sort of a riparian zone or whatever that's there, has an impact. Kind of can goof some of that up too, but it will repair itself. So yes.
And I would like to see at the end of this process, the zoning ordinance provides guidance to build up to the creek. I think everybody agrees it's a great resource and there's not enough access to it. We would like to experience it more and it be more available to the town to show off as one of our resources. And I do think there are ways we have seen throughout history, to Robert's point, that people have built up to water sources. But most importantly, our historic district is really close in a lot of spots to the creek. And if we are able to activate those spaces and turn them into new commercial, it's gonna both show off our best resource, but also help revitalize the historic district. I think it's a win-win if we can get that guidance in the zoning ordinance on how to do it successfully. And how to make sure we're not flooding, how to make sure we're not causing additional problems downstream, no pollutants. We want to do it the right way, but it would be a big win for everybody if we could build wisely up to the creek, especially in the historic district.
And you know, the EPA initiative is bringing hydrologists and coast topographers and people who understand those kinds of things to bear.
Yeah.
And getting that information, I really think having that information from Horsley Witten and the EPA, that before you make the decisions to build in these areas, so that you know what you're doing rather than just approving them and then hoping that because some of the developers we've already had problems in other areas where they've been cavalier in their development up in King Ridge, Antioch, and it's problematic. So getting that understanding of the hydrology down and the karst down first and then judiciously building is the appropriate way to go. It will be sustainable because when you do flood, the flooding damage will be minimal.
Well, and there's so many developers today who also can build nowhere near water and somehow cause flooding problems, you know? And so I think
Especially when you're on the karst.
it's fortunate that this study is going on at the same time as what we're doing here, because it allows a much greater level of exploration and detail to be incorporated into what we could have normally done. So I'm excited to see that. It's a little tricky here because the creek is so close to the road, so often, most of the time it seems like, and then having enough room to do meaningful development that actually you want it to face the road as well, so it's a nice experience on the road and the creek. And so you have this like, now we got to do two-sided development, which is no big deal. It's not hard to do that, but then we got to figure out, well, where are they going to park, you know? And so it's a bit of a conundrum, but I'm excited to look at it.
Something I was hoping that we could address tonight too.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, did everybody agree we need a parking building or a parking?
I like how they have in
Something that's not
Yes.
concrete all over the place.
We have like 2 parking garages.
So you mean going up instead of out with parking?
Yeah, I have no idea.
What's up,
but
Franklin?
I wish I
I
did.
mean, Martin's
I
is
know
a good
somebody
example.
here does.
I mean, all that,
Parking to go where?
Parking that
Parking
doesn't
garages.
require a lot of
Crawling out.
concrete, you know, a lot of
it's
pervious,
expensive. That's the
ugly.
problem with
Yeah, it is.
parking garages.
What is it for space?
About $20,000.
At least.
I had a question. So just thinking of more like parks and green spaces and places to gather with people, are there like picnic tables or different park equipment that can withstand flooding or be in a floodplain?
For sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, and
And there are plants that can withstand flooding.
right. They love the flooded some of them. One of the things that I've been struggling with a little bit is that you all don't have a physical space that's the like physical heart of the community, right? You have the historic village, but it's a linear thing, and we talked about the experience of being there already. And you have these sort of regional athletic facilities and complexes, and I'm sure there's some other parks scattered here and there, but none of them are the heart, the physical core, the center. And so, what do y'all think about that?
I mean,
Did y'all notice that?
Yeah, like I lived out in Salt Lake for 15 years and they were really big about parks out there. And so they have like Liberty Park, Pioneer Park, Emery Grove, and those are like the hearts of like that part of town. And it's nice to have, like, it was nice to be able to like go there, congregate. It was enough space that you kind of let your kid run around and you didn't think they were going to get hit by a car or anything. Yeah, we don't really have that. I mean, we have like the rec center. We have like the schools with their playgrounds. If you're in a neighborhood, like our neighborhoods have playgrounds, but there's nothing really located within the community.
Yeah, it would be nice to have an overall city center versus individual developments that have a center themselves. I think the town wants to come together as a whole and we want a full city center, right? I would love to be able to go somewhere where I can have dinner, get a drink, sit, listen to live music, whatever it might be, within a full experience versus having to go from this development to that development to this development to, even if it's a, you know, a corner of somewhere, just something that is Nolensville, right? A town center, you know, it's where you go to hit the farmer's market and to gather and to spend your day, whether it's a park with your kids or it's whatever it might be, but just one unit that is developed that you call the center of town. Like how-
Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen.
Thanks, Nolan.
We got it. And when I think of Nolensville, my favorite part of Nolensville is the people. I think we just have such kind people and everyone has such a good heart that I think our city center should reflect that. I think that what you're talking about could be charming and quaint and represent Nolensville, even though it is a village or an outdoor amphitheater or whatever it is. I think that it could definitely reflect the people and not be like everywhere.
To jump on your comment, like I know we have like that Bent Creek Facebook group, and somebody did something at the pavilion like a week or so ago where they were trying to get those like Bent Creek residents who have like maybe businesses to like go there and like promote their business and like sell their stuff. Like that could be cool to have in Nolensville. And you can have like, like, you know, like Franklin has their fairs. Like
that open market sort of
Yeah,
thing.
open
Kinda like
market
that farm
feel.
stop
Yeah.
that I was talking about.
Yeah. So one thing to note, okay, if you think about it, any physical city center, town center place that you can think of that you've been, that you like, historic, you know, whatever. There's not just the green space. There's the opposite of the green space. There's the building. There's the vibrancy of the mixed use in the streetscape that defines the green. Imagine Central Park sitting in the middle of the forest. Wouldn't really notice Central Park, would you? Right? And so as you all have discussions through this process, and we talk about density and what that means and all of this, these are the kind of nuances to this discussion that become important. Currently in your village zoning district, it can go up to 4 stories. So that's pretty good, you know, so you've got that already in place. It's not like we have to figure that out. The question is, when we start to think about creating some of these places as a center here, there, whatever, I know like a lot of the places that not a lot, but some of the places where it seems like it wants to happen and is starting to naturally happen with just development pressure and stuff, is kind of down the road around that big triangle area. You know, so we've got 2 grocery stores that are looking to come in. There's the new development that's kind of on the corner across from the cemetery. There's all of this stuff, but there's houses all along the edge of that already. And so it's tricky to start to figure out how do you, in a place like this, especially that's kind of early on in its growth cycle, how do you think about transforming something that is one way into something that is a different kind of thing?
I think it's telling that right next door to the town hall is called the town center.
I know.
And the form that took is kind of a U-shaped strip mall. And with the Market Square project, that was going to be 3-story buildings that hasn't really come to fruition, and town hall, this was intended to be the city center. But after hearing a 10-minute conversation in city center, nobody's brought that up. I think that's telling the form of that town center doesn't accomplish that true city center that we're looking for. And like our farmers market that everybody loves is doing its best in the closest center to the center we can give it, but we can do better. I think we can achieve something greater in a more of a village setting, like you're saying, with buildings that surround a green space that has a bigger area for the farmers market to be in the central focus, you know, on the weekend. So that it's just telling to me that our existing town center called the Nolensville Town Center, no one considers it the center of the town.
Yeah, I know. I keep being offended by that name every time I drive by there. Is it possible to revoke that, or you know?
Well, there's a reason it was called the town center, because when it was built,
was
Town
town
center.
center.
But town center has a meaning.
But it did have a
should.
meeting, and it was supposed to be developed as a town center. And unfortunately, without getting too negative, historically, we all of a sudden ended up with a couple of buildings right in the middle of what could have been more of a town center. There was supposed to be, this town hall was actually supposed to be slightly differently located. There were some major things that had the opportunity to make it a town center. And it was where the major population was. Now we've kind of expanded out, mostly Rocky Fork, somewhat Sunset. We're starting to head south. So the town center is moving as the population moves. And it's kind of where we can do that. The only thing I would object in terms of your statements is when you say zoning allows up to 4 stories. And when I think of town centers and at the same time think about keeping our folksy or town feel, 4-story buildings don't really excite me at all. 2-story maybe, but when you start going up, now you're talking to look more, it starts to feel more and more urban. And I think, everything I keep hearing from the majority of people that I talk with is somehow keeping, and you look at our purpose statement that's being discussed, it's keeping that rural sense, it's keeping, I think it's got agriculture in there, but agriculture is not who we are anymore. That's, other than a few head of cattle floating here and there, there's no agriculture going on here. But it's keeping that balance of rural and small town, and small towns don't go up, but they do have a center to them. And I think you're right in that sense of somehow pulling those things together.
Can I just add a comment to that? You can go I'm thinking about Kentlands. Some of those buildings were 4 stories high, and they were beautiful, old fashioned. They looked almost European. The Kentlands, which Brian showed last night. I lived near Kentlands. I was in the DC area, and it's quite beautiful and charming and kind of old world. And in my hometown, it's very rural there on the outskirts of town. Somebody made their business, which is I think like a design, I think it was a consultant business that did design development. They made their building look like a barn. I mean, it's a beautiful barn. It's gorgeous. So you can have high density development in a town center that has apartments and beautiful 4-story buildings that you don't even realize that they're 4 stories high because they're so charming and so beautiful.
Well, and I think one of the things I've been trying to get at, and will continue to be said throughout these next few days, is get people to, as you just did, articulate what it is you think small town is. I now know what you think small town is. And we'll show images of things as well to help people sort of calibrate that with us. But, my question is, and when I hear, concerns about things like 4 stories or not, or whatever, I never understand how it is that people so readily accept like a grocery store with a massive parking lot out front of it, and it has nothing to do with rural, nothing to do with small town charm, nothing to do with Nolensville. That's everything to do with groceries, and you all driving everywhere. And so there's an acceptance of things like that. But when, we talk about like, do we densify a little bit? And again, not one size fits all. You wouldn't want 4 stores everywhere. You may not want it at all. Like everyone may agree with that. I'm just like using that as an example. So would it be so bad if we had a village green that had a few buildings that maybe some were 4 and some were 3 and some were 2, and then elsewhere with 1 story or whatever is the sort of comfort zone, but you knew you arrived, you knew it was a place, and you got that bang, and then people go like, wow, have you been to Nolensville Town Center? And they're like, oh yeah, that strip mall, and they're no, the real one, right? And so we like take the name back or whatever.
I want to make sure Eric got
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I'm terrible.
No, multiple-sided. I just, places where I grew up, New Jersey, and being in Philadelphia and everything. I'm not saying you're going to turn this into that. That's not what I'm going for. It's extremism. The 4-story buildings to me
that I've been around just tend to close things in. You know, I'm just picturing like, if you're going down Nolensville Road and you look off the corner of Rocky Fork, whether it's Publix there or not, whatever ends up being there. If there were 4-story buildings there, you're not gonna see beyond those as you're driving down Nolensville Road. You go 2, you go 3, at best, and there, you're still gonna be able to see the greenery over top because you had that elevation difference. But, you know, if you made a town center there, for instance, and you just had 4-story buildings, you know, how do you write a code for what you just described? Some 4-story, some 3, some 2. That's got to be very difficult to do. Whereas I want to be able to see the trees. And I get it, we're growing all those other pieces. But that was my problem with the Kroger one. It was the fact that now you're going 4 stories. And now you're going to see, as you drive down the Nolensville Road, yeah, you may have a tree line. Tops of those tree lines are going to be headed by buildings. Don't want to see that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, it's
I
hard.
don't disagree with, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I always tell people the hardest thing to do is write code for rural, small town charm. Because it's so quirky and unique and fragile.
That's all we want.
So, right.
Quirky, unique,
fragile.
fragile.
Lanes, just provide lanes.
Just give us 3 lanes.
Just
wide,
lanes, right? I know.
That's all.
To speak to your point, I agree with you. And I think part of, in the last 2 weeks, I feel like a few of you here, but have communicated to so many people in the town discussing the Krogers and Publix and what that looks like and what we really want and how does it go. And we back up to the proposed Publix. And I think if we had a true city center and we did have some visually pleasing 4-story buildings, but it was an atmosphere that created an experience overall, that's what we're looking for. And then if we could get the continued commercial and retail that we needed, that also brought the charm to the town, but wasn't so individualized. I feel like as we are now, it's the experience he was describing. If I want to go to Brothers, great. I drive to Brothers, I get my burger, then I have to go to Sweet Titi's and I have to get. So if we continue with that development, i.e. Kroger that's going in, or Publix, right? And you have your restaurant, we need enough of that space that I can drive to that development and stay there. I don't have to feel like I am then having to leave and go someplace else. So if you're giving me a development with a grocery for that commercial and the retail, I need more than 3 things. I need more than like, let me go grab my quick sandwich because now I have to go, right? If we're wanting the experience overall, I would love to see a place that I go and I stay and it's the heart of my town. And when family comes, that's where we're going. We're not going to this place and then that place. And if it's here and it's in the heart, I can still get to Brothers. I can get to Martin's or Outlanders. I can still experience what is here. Then if I need a quick sandwich on a weekday for lunch, I'm running over to Kroger's, grabbing my sandwich, and then I can come back or whatever it might be. But I feel like we're getting so individualized with each development and we're focused on each development having its own center, that it's going to push us away from coming together and being in that center. Because now you're scattered and, oh, it's easy, I'll just grab, you know, a drink here or something to eat here, but you're not coming together. So you're not really getting that feel that I think we all love Nolensville for.
Your town is being designed parcel by parcel by developers.
And not overall. There's
It's
no
like
big
and they're coming in
picture.
here telling us what they're gonna give us.
Amen.
And can I give a thought on just like the 3-story buildings? So when I think of like 2, 3-story buildings and they have some offices and some stores and we're like, oh, we just want 1 story here. So that would be 6 different businesses and taking up more of the land that we could be seeing. That's just my thought, when we could make something a little taller, but very architecturally pleasing, like you were describing.
Well,
It's
I
just
think
a
we have
thought.
to remember the funds that the town has and the capability that we have to protect and help those buildings. So part of it is not so much the structure that is being built and what that looks like, but how do we help that structure should it need the assistance? And we don't have that yet as a town to go to a 4-story building and say, you're on fire, but we can't get to you. Let's hope the water shoots out of the hose high enough. Like, we don't have that capability yet. So part of that is some of the impact fees, perhaps over time that builds up and we're able to make those purchases. But some of those decisions that have to come from building is we don't have the resources to provide what is needed to those developments.
That's
We want to
what
put,
was done when they bought, they got a ladder truck. That's why the 4th story was agreed upon. The truck doesn't work, nor do they have a driver at the time.
Correct.
Okay, they don't have a ladder truck to get to the 4th story. So that's great that they say they're gonna buy you one, but do you have the funds for salary for those 4 people that are gonna run that truck on 3 different shifts for the entire year, plus the benefits that comes along with it?
How you gonna buy it to start?
Exactly. It's $2 million, what, $4 million?
something like that,
For a
2.8
truck.
something.
What, for a used one that was cracked? That they should have bought in the first place? Okay, we're back to square one again.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing though, I mean, those are very important things to figure out and consider and necessary. They definitely aren't insurmountable though. If those are the things, like if you want this or that or the other, that stuff can be figured out. So, but it has to be figured out. It can't just be sort of,
It's prioritized
you know,
in the right direction.
Right.
If I may, then, what it seems then is that rather than us waiting as a town for a developer to come to us to say, hey, I'm gonna build you a town center, and here's what you're gonna give me when I do it, on the corner of Clovercroft and Nolensville Road, and maybe all the way to Williams Road, wherever that is, or out King Street. We need as a town to start looking for a developer or developers with a plan in hand to say, here's what we're looking for. Who can build it for us in partnership, rather than us sitting back waiting for the next developer to
right
build a
project.
town center or the right project. We need to be advertising, here's what we want, and bidding out a right project.
Why we need them to get it done.
well, and not all developers really can deliver a proper town center. They can deliver a town center, or they can deliver a, you know, but a place that is authentic, that doesn't feel like a new development, that, you know, all of these things, like, it's a special developer that does that. But when you have a place that's as desirable as this place is, and people are coming here, it's not a hard sell if you make it the path easy for the developer to do the thing, to build you your town center, because it's a win-win, right? They get to make money off of it, and you get the place that you want, right? If you, let's just show of hands, has everyone here been to West Haven before? Okay, so West Haven, it has its town center. It has a 4-story building in its town center. I don't know if you realize that or not. I didn't until there every day. Well, it's actually 4, right? So the other thing it has is a full-size Kroger. And it's still a great walkable town center. So my point is, it doesn't have to be like, oh, if we want a grocery store, then we have to have a crummy development, or just, you know, 2 or 3 shops, right? You have everything you need. You got the dry cleaners, you got the hair salon, you got Vanderbilt Clinic, the dentist, the on and on and on. Everything's there. You can park one time and never get in your car again until you're ready to go somewhere else. And so
They had the
it can
codes
be
and
done.
zoning for everything
They
got
didn't.
built.
They did a
Well, the fire
PUD.
station for them to build, my husband's from fire.
So they do have a
In
fire
order for them to
station.
build that station cost them, my husband's raised for like 5 years, I'll tell you that much.
Well,
You know, and I'm like, but the doors alone are ridiculously expensive, but it had to match everything that was built there. I feel like these people are coming in here going, this is what you're getting. We want a special PD, we want special this, and this is what we're gonna give you.
Right.
Because I need to make money.
And we
After
know
I
you're so
leave.
desperate for funds right now to do
Exactly,
improvements
because we
in the
keep
town.
saying we need
You're
money,
gonna
we
take
need
it if
money.
we don't get it.
Well, no, we need it built right, not the money right now, it being wrong, and all of us can't get to it, because it takes us an hour to get to dinner. Well, no, you know what, the reason why we close at 3, because you can't get out. The traffic is so bad. You know, like, that's why we close.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't turn left.
Well,
You know?
West Haven have apartments.
it has
They have an apartment
multifamily.
complex,
Multifamily.
but does it have an apartment complex there?
No.
It depends on what you mean. Like, you mean
Like
an
a
apartment
standalone building
complex?
with
Standalone
apartments and
apartment.
Yeah, it does.
Does it?
They're not for rent. They're for sale. So it's condo building, multifamily condo.
I'm saying no to the standalone complex.
No.
Yes, complex.
Yeah, and the difference is that, you know, if you're doing multifamily in a place that resembles anything like the things I've been hearing you guys talk about, you should never describe it as a complex. It shouldn't be thought of as an apartment complex. That's why I was asking what you mean. If you mean, do they have multifamily units in West Haven? Yes, they do. And they actually have lots and lots of rental in West Haven, and rent their houses, their townhouses, condos, but there's not like the leasing office where you walk in and there's the manager.
Like the one proposed is what I'm getting at.
Right.
They do not have any
Oh,
four-story apartment.
I just wanted to reiterate how much I love everybody talking about this town center and the village and I love everything that you've been saying because my family all lives out of town. And so I'm driving a few hours to go see them. And I go through all of these small towns with these empty old box stores with just these seas of asphalt, and they're empty and they're useless and they're hideous. And I'm like, that's the last thing I would want for Nolensville is these big box stores sprawled out that just end up not being successful and ugly. So I just love everybody's talk of the town center and
Well,
the
that
village and
reminds
everything.
reminds me to tell you all this. So like earlier, sitting there and he said, oh, I didn't want to say anything before because I was afraid I'd say the wrong thing and ruin all the stuff that you said that was so good. If you like this, some of the things we're talking about, we need to hear that too. So what you just did, like, you know, I like this thing. Because that's what we're trying to figure out. What do y'all want, right? And so a lot of times people, you like to not drive 15 minutes. Well, that we often hear like people, you know, if you say, well, I don't want us to grow, or I don't, you know, whatever, not just here, but I mean, anywhere we work, it tends to be very concerning to people who aren't in favor of growth, for growth to occur. And so they're the ones who take the time in the evening to come out. And it's everybody who thinks things are good. They're like, oh yeah, everybody else agrees with me, so I'll just stay at home, and they'll say it. So, you know, I don't have a dog in the hunt here. So however you all want it to be, we need to know that. But keep coming through the process.
And I know people are afraid of apartments, but like I said, like when my kids are grown and out of school, I would love for them to come live in their hometown and have affordable housing. And then when I'm older and they can afford a big home in Nolensville, I would love a place that I don't have to maintain. And of course, something in Nolensville will be built so charming and so quaint. It's not going to be this apartment like complex we're all afraid of with the riffraff. It's not going to be in Nolensville. It's going to be
if we don't do it right.
Right,
Can I
exactly.
say just two things real quick? First of all, having raised two sons here, one's in Cody, Wyoming, the other one is in Charlotte Park, and both of them lived at home after college for a year, save as frankly as they could enough money to move away from mom and dad. So yes, as a parent, I would love to have my kids down the street with my grandkids. I don't know if they agree with that. So the other thing is, but more seriously, is definitions and making sure, because there's some real change in definitions. It's like Old Bell Park proposal has manor houses with 10 units.
Yep.
That's an apartment building.
Not an apartment complex though.
It's an apartment, they have 10 of them in a row. That's a complex thing. But the point is, that used to be what we call garden apartments. The names are changing. Work, live is code for, well, we'll have a store down below and we'll have apartments upstairs.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that as you're writing the codes or helping develop in your role is clearly defining what these things mean and what they look like, because it's very different when somebody says to me, a manor home, I think of a true manor home with a very large house with a single family. I don't think of 3 or 4 stories with 10 units. That's an apartment building, whether you call it a complex or what. It's an apartment building. And when you start having 2 or 3 or 4, it's the same thing when you talk about multifamily. Well, is that townhouses? And is that townhouses like Lenox Square? Or is that townhouses like Greenbrook North, which most people gag a little bit when they think of that one, because it is not attractive and it's all holding held all held by holding companies and it's rental space. It's glorified apartment. So I just ask, as you use those terms, make sure as you come out so that everybody understands what they mean, because they really can be very confusing and misleading.
Brian, can I take it from here?
Please.
I will pitch it because that is a great segue into the next section, which is tomorrow, which is housing. Is that correct?
Housing, community character,
Here we go.
development, and all that. But just to put you at ease, the way that we write our zoning ordinances is very specific. It's very clear, and very graphic. And so there's no code words. So when we say live work, it's very clear that that means you have a retail or commercial space on the ground floor and someone lives above, and could be apartments, could be the owner, the store owner, just like we always used to do in small towns. So.
I mean, I guess why the person who's naming this manor home, they're trying to give you a, I guess I think of that, I understand why it's confusing, but I think what they're trying to do is reflect the character of this series of houses or complex or whatever you want to call it. If they make it look like a manor home and there's 10 units, I love it. I think that sounds good. You know,
When you think about it in historic neighborhoods, you'll see
Yeah.
mansions that have been converted into apartments.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know
And
what
they're
it
still a
was like
mansion, even though they have multifamily in it. So then it comes down to, well, is it the form that's concerning, or is it the fact that
what's inside of it.
apartments, they don't want apartments?
Because if it looks like
know?
something on the outside, but it happens to be apartments on the inside, but it looks like the thing on the outside, if we're just talking about the aesthetic, I don't care. Like, I mean, as long as.
But I think
aesthetic-
defining them, I get the point of wanting the term defined, absolutely, because it is, you looking at that and you're thinking, oh, the manor house, wow, what are we talking?
We shouldn't be tricking anyone.
Right.
Yeah,
there's no
exactly. We're gonna
choice.
hit that to the next meeting, but yeah, exactly.
With semantics.